I get lonely in this house, all by myself.
Oh, Jesus.
Ed Gein was a kind of meek, unremarkable man. There's something eerie about that.
It's so macabre, so bizarre, so deviant that we can't look away.
Gein was digging up bodies, but what he did with the body parts is extraordinary.
You think Ed killed Colette?
She's hanging in his cellar.
What did you intend to do with her body? What parts would you take home? Who helped you when you got them out of the graves? Maybe they didn't think.
Imagine walking into a farmhouse in rural Wisconsin, expecting a normal day at work, and instead finding what looks like a haunted house designed by Jeffrey Dahmer's interior decorator. Congratulations, you've just entered the world of Ed Gein, a man whose crimes were so bizarre, so grotesque, they inspired half of Hollywood's horror villains.
Based on a true story. Just that small phrase that these events actually happened sort of makes the film much more both relevant and much more terrifying.
Of fiction, who are really good at it, could take Ed Gein and you could make him almost anything you wanted to make him in the world of horror.
Forget Freddy, Jason, or Michael Myers. They all owe a little something to Ed. Today, we're diving into the twisted story of the Plainfield Ghoul, and trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end for this one. Oh, and before we dig in, pun intended, I upload true crime breakdowns once or twice a week. So hit that subscribe button and join the family. Now, let's meet Ed Gein, the man who turned graveyards into his personal Home Depot.
The writers of fiction, who are really good at it, could take Ed Gein and you could make him almost anything you wanted to make him in the world of horror, because he had so much to work with.
It's so macabre, so bizarre, so deviant that we can't look away.
Ed Gein was born in 1906 in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. His father was an alcoholic. His mother, Augusta, was deeply religious, controlling, and believed that women, all women, except herself, of course, were the root of sin.
How long have you known Mr. 7 years? 7 years. What kind of a man did you know him as? Well, a man, he's a nice man, just like anybody else. The only difference I'd say in the man, he seems to be a little hot.
Yeah. Nothing screams healthy childhood like a mom who thinks dating is basically a one-way ticket to hell. Ed grew up socially awkward, bullied, and completely dependent on his mother's approval. His only real friend was his brother Henry, but even that wouldn't last.
She is a devout Christian and she has some very extreme ideas about sin and about morality. And she drums into her sons that they're not to socialize with anybody outside of the family because all of the people around them in the local town are sinners, they're evil, all the women are whores.
Henry died in 1944 during a brush fire. The circumstances were suspicious. Some whispered Ed might have been involved, but nothing was ever proven. In 1945, Ed's mother died, and that's when his fragile world completely collapsed. He boarded up her room as a shrine. The rest of the house fell into filth and decay. It was the beginning of his spiral into madness. Instead of, therapy, Ed turned to anatomy books and crime magazines, because that's definitely the healthier coping mechanism. Ed began sneaking into cemeteries at night, digging up freshly buried women who reminded him of his mother. He would bring the bodies back home, experiment, cut, stitch, craft. He turned corpses into masks, vests, bowls, and even furniture, because apparently IKEA just wasn't weird enough for him. Ed Gein wasn't just a grave robber. He also killed Mary Hogan, a tavern owner, vanished in 1954. Bernice Warden, a hardware store owner, disappeared in 1957. Her case would finally expose Ed. When police searched his farmhouse, they didn't just find Bernice's body. They found the collection, masks of human skin, skulls turned into bowls, a body strung up like a deer in the shed. Officers described it as a scene straight out of a nightmare.
If you ever wanted to have a Halloween party, that would be a great place for it. It was a spooky house out in the edge of town, and it was dark, and there wasn't a sign of life there.
One of them turned on his flashlight and beamed it around and saw this object that was hanging from the rafters, which at first they thought was some kind of gutted deer. They realized, to their incredible horror, that it was a woman's corpse that was hanging by its heels.
Well, Gein's entire house was in a state of really unimaginable squalor. It was so completely overwhelmed with the trash of a decade.
It was chaos. In terms of housekeeping, well, you don't keep house. The kitchen was a jumble.
Ed was arrested, confessed to murders and grave robbing. Doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. He was declared unfit for trial and committed to a mental institution. Later, he was found competent, convicted for the murder of Bernice Worden, but still sent to psychiatric care. He spent the rest of his life there until his death in 1984.
He was perfectly happy to cooperate with the police. You know, all he asked for was a slice of apple pie with some cheddar cheese on top of it.
And according to the investigator, Ed ate the thing, and after that he told them anything they wanted to know.
They said, well, what's all these body parts in here, Ed? You know, how many people did you kill? All the dead stuff in his house, they just assumed that it was like murder victim.
He was subjected to a very lengthy interrogation. He freely confessed to the murders of Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan. When the police first broke into Gein's house and discovered this crazy mass of body parts, their first assumption was Gein was a serial killer. It was only during his interrogation that he revealed that they were taken from the corpses he had dug up from these local cemeteries. And people, in a way, had a harder time believing that than that he was a serial killer. That seemed like totally beyond the bounds of belief for a whole variety of reasons.
Imagine the group therapy circle in that place. What do you do for a hobby, Ed? Oh, you know, a little arts and crafts. Ed Gein's crimes would echo far beyond Plainfield. His story inspired Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, and even a low-budget exploitation flick called The Butcher of Plainfield.
The story of Psycho is the story of Norman Bates, a single, deeply disturbed mama's boy, for lack of a better word, who runs a hotel and murders unsuspecting young women who cause him to have any sexual urges or impulses.
One of the main things that Block took from the Gein case was the psychological relationship between Norman and his mother, which very much parallels that between Annie and his mother.
So yeah, Ed only killed 2 people, but he still managed to inspire half of Hollywood's nightmares. Not exactly the legacy you want on your resume, but hey, he left his mark.
When they uncovered them, they discovered that the coffins had been broken into, and the bodies were missing, or, you know, there were just parts of the skeleton remaining there.
He admitted to grave robbing 9 corpses, but the maths didn't quite add up because the police had found 12 human heads in Gein's property, and he'd only admitted to 11 offences against separate people. So the numbers never really added up properly. So there's always been questions over that.
Ed Gein wasn't a serial killer in the traditional sense, but his crimes blurred the line between reality and horror. He turned grief into monstrosity, obsession into madness, and a farmhouse into the stuff of legends. That's why, decades later, we're still haunted by the Plainfield ghoul.
That are fascinating about Ed Gein is the fact that he only, as far as we know, murdered 2 people, which is a lot less than many infamous killers, but he's had such a huge legacy in films, books, music. He seems to have become a sort of pop culture murderer.
At the time the Gein crimes were being revealed in the press, there was a writer of pulp horror named Robert Bloch, who had moved to Wisconsin to be with his wife's family. And at some point, when Gein was being interviewed by various psychiatrists, all these headlines in the papers were trumpeting the fact that Gein had been motivated by these deranged Oedipal conflicts, you know, that he was this desperately sick mama's boy, you know, who was perpetrating these atrocities on middle-aged women
who reminded him of his mother. And this caught the attention of Robert Bloch, who decided this could potentially make the basis of a good horror novel.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget, I upload new true crime stories once or twice a week. Hit subscribe, join the community, and let's keep unraveling the most insane criminal files that never sleep. Thanks for watching. And hey, maybe don't buy your next lampshade secondhand.